John 20:31. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. St. John tells us that the whole point of his writing his gospel was so that we might believe in Christ and have life in his name. The Greek word for life in this passage is a form of the word Zoe. Now, I'm an amateur. I don't speak Greek, but I research this stuff and take this with a grain of salt. But from what I understand, the Greeks had two words for life, bios and Zoe. Bios tended to mean biological life. It's in the word biology, biography, the life of a person, immediate life, existence. Zoe implied life in general, something greater, perhaps spiritual life. John seems to use it throughout the New Testament to mean something like spiritual life or something more than our mere physical existence. Bios versus Zoe. One way to help understand that difference is to think of the cartoon Rocky and Bullwinkle. In Rocky and Bullwinkle, there are heroes, Rocky the Moose and Bullwinkle, the flying squirrel, and they are always being pursued by the villains, Boris and Natasha, who are two Russian spies. Boris is about 2 feet tall and ugly, and Natasha is his beautiful, but really not, associate, and she's mysterious. And the thing that used to really frustrate me when I was a kid and I would watch this cartoon is Boris and Natasha would always disguise themselves to trap Rocky and Bullwinkle, and Rocky and Bullwinkle never realized that Boris and Natasha were in disguise, even though they would talk like this, and they would clearly be the same people wearing maybe a fake mustache. Rocky and Bullwinkle would never notice. Well, in one episode, Boris and Natasha are chasing the moose and the squirrel. And Boris is stopped by the fact that something falls on his head. I don't remember exactly what. It was either a safe from a skyscraper window or an anvil from a cliff. Being a cartoon character, it squishes him and he crawls out from underneath it and kind of pops back up, but he's only half his original size and he looks like an accordion. Natasha, his companion, is surprised that he survived. And she says, Boris, you're living. And he says, you call this living? You call this living? That implies the difference. He's not living it up. Whoopee. He's just been squished, flatter than a pancake. It's hardly living. Hardly living the high life. That implies the difference. Natasha is saying to him, Boris, you have bios, you have physical existence, you're alive. He says, you call this living? He's saying this isn't much of a life. By which he means not only the quality of life, but something greater about what life is or ought to be. And so we turn to C.S. Lewis. Lewis says, he says, the biological sort which comes to us through nature, the biological sort of life, and which, like everything else in nature, is always tending to run down and decay so that it can only be kept up by incessant subsidies from nature in the form of air, water, food, etc., is bios. The spiritual life, which is in God from all eternity, and which made the whole natural universe, is Zoe. Bios has, to be sure, a certain shadowy or symbolic resemblance to Zoe, but only the sort of resemblance there is between a photo and a place, or a statue and a man. A man who changed from having bios to having Zoe would have gone through as big a change as a statue which changed from being a carved stone to being a real man. And later there's more. That site didn't have it all. He says, and that is precisely what Christianity is about. The world is a great sculptor's shop. We are the statues. And there's a rumor going around the shop that some of us are someday going to come to life, meaning Zoe. Lewis is brilliant at using analogies. As a photo is to a place, so bios is to Zoe. As a statue is to the man that it represents, the living man, so bios is to Zoe. Now, of course, a photo and a statue don't have life, but he's speaking in an analogy. He's making a symbolic, metaphoric comparison. And maybe that's helpful to you, because I think those images, everyday life as we experience it, is mostly a photo. The life of God is a place, and the photo is merely the picture of that place, the two-dimensional representation of that three-dimensional place, the shadows on the wall in the allegory of the cave in Plato's Republic, as opposed to the three-dimensional objects in the sun, which throws the shadows. And the statue is the mere bios. Our life is nothing but a kind of representation of a greater and more exciting life beyond. Our life is merely walking around flatter than a pancake, two-dimensional, because we've all been hit on the heads by anvils and safes falling from buildings, you know. I hate it when that happens. And we walk around flatter than a pancake. And that's the two-dimensional or one-dimensional life that we're used to. But the fuller life is living, as Boris would say. I think these images, and C.S. Lewis is using merely images, it's a kind of symbolic talk, which is really all you can do when it comes to these mysteries. I think these images and these symbols are more helpful in thinking about the life that Jesus comes to bring us. I have come that they might have life and have it more abundantly, he says. Zoe. I think these images help more to ponder that than thinking about angels with clouds playing harps in heaven or devils with pitchforks. I think that kind of an analogy, because I think we have a sense that there is something more to life and more mysterious to life. And according to St. John, it's why he wrote his gospel. So that you, like Thomas, might believe without seeing, although Thomas believed only by seeing, or perhaps it's a combination of both. You see a little and you believe a little. Either way, like Thomas, we can say, my Lord and my God. And like Lazarus, we can say, he has brought me out of the tomb. And like the little girl he raises from the dead, we can arise to a greater and a richer life, and a life of love, and a life of joy, and a life of peace. Because that's what we're about. And that's what we should be a channel of to others.